I was telling Jamie that I had a successful failure last night talking to my daughter with some things we talked about yesterday. So I have a 10-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son, and my 8-year-old son is very sick. He has a pretty bad seizure disorder where at his worst he used to have about 100 seizures a day. He's doing much better now. He goes weeks without seizures, which is great. But he also has nonverbal autism and can be behaviorally pretty difficult. So it's not easy growing up in a household as the older sister or as the parents of a child like that. So she is a beautiful young girl, does very well everywhere except for at home with me. She shows me a lot of attitude and can be very difficult and is very good at verbalizing why. So she says to me, "You show him more attention than you show to me." And so she's very mad at me about that. And so we've had a lot of really difficult conversations over the years where it's, been tears and screaming and yelling and just stress. And so last night, she was showing me, well, actually I got home yesterday and we haven't been feeling well this week. So, he was taking a nap. And so I was resting on the couch next to her. And she loves that. It's attention, right? So he gets up and behaviorally, sometimes he starts to fixate on people. And when he does that, he'll throw things at you and scratch you and hit you. And so he started to do that with her. And so I started to play with him. I got up and I was playing with him and I took him to a corner and read him a book and then was sitting on the couch next to him. And it's not easy. He's scratching me and he's hitting me, but I'm doing all of that for her. So she starts to show some attitude and she's being rude to me. And I say, "So how are you feeling right now?" And she says, "Well, I'm mad that you're showing him more attention than you're showing to me." I said, "How's that make you feel?" And she goes, "Fine. I feel fine." And I go, "Well, I don't think you feel fine. I think you have some feelings. I think you should try to think about how that's making you feel." "Well, I feel fine." "Okay, I'm not going to push it." I was really hoping to get to the feelings so that I could ask her the first time she ever felt that way, which I know would have been early on in her life because we've had a lot of trauma early on especially. And so I don't know, 10 minutes go by and she starts showing me some attitude again. And I say, "So how are you feeling right now?" And she goes, "Well, I'm mad. You're showing him more attention than you're showing me." I said, I know that. I said, "So how does that make you feel?" "Fine. I feel fine." So I decided that I wasn't going to get to the feeling. So I just went to the reframing of the situation we were in. I said, "Taya, I want you to rethink this situation for a second." I said, "Because I see what I'm doing right now actually as me showing you ultimate care and love right now." I said, "I don't actually want to play with Logan right now. I feel really sick right now. I would like to just be resting on the couch." I said, "But I'm sitting next to him and playing with him so that he's not hitting you. And so he's not, throwing things at you, so that you can rest and watch TV like you're watching right now." And she didn't say anything. Everything switched in her. She became the nice, loving child that she always is for everybody else. She started to take care of me. She started to play with him even. She ended up going and running and getting the thermometer to take my temperature. The whole rest of the night was her true identity, who she really is. We were able to just reframe how she was thinking about that situation, and it changed everything.
Yeah, isn't that awesome? Yeah. Yes.
That's beautiful. You started to tell me. And what I love about what you're saying is it's baby steps. What's that movie? What About Bob? Remember that movie? Baby steps, baby steps, baby steps. What's the actor? Bill Murray. But that's what it is. And I think a lot of times we're looking for this big moment that changes everything, and then we're done. We're not talking about a one and done. We're talking about a whole life transformation, and it's one step at a time. And so that was like one step that's going to lead to many more. So way to go.
And see this, if she was describing her situation with her kids in terms of the health issues, what in the world are you going to say to a person that's wrestling in that kind of level of, but look at the amazing thing that happened without some, high level, complicated process of here's how you deal with all that. Just looking at her daughter and saying, all she got her daughter to do was see truth. That's what she got her to see, just what's truly happening, So when she saved her daughter years of no one pays attention to me, and I've got to self-promote and self-protect, which will damage her life based on a situation that happens when she's young, where what she thinks about the situation is actually wrong. The facts aren't wrong. Her conclusion is wrong, right? And so once this is, how many of you have been in a board meeting where the person says you pay more attention to them than me? Every board meeting I've ever been in, that's the problem. Like the 10-year-old doesn't change. Just because you have a PhD in economics or something and you're sitting in a boardroom, you're still trying to get attention. What's the answer to that? You look at the person and go, tell me how this situation makes you feel. And even when she pushed back, what she did was just say, okay, I can either let you discover truth or I can help you hear truth. But so beautifully and gently, like that. Let me tell you what's actually happening in this situation. Now what do you think? And it's not magic, right? There's no formula to it. It's just truth sets people free. That's what truth always does. And the truth is not always easy. It can be quite painful, but on the other side of the pain, sort of dying to the false and coming up into the true, is liberation. It's so liberating. So anyone else want to say anything about yesterday? Yes, go ahead.
I meet with 4 guys, and I've been wrestling with a situation in my life about this whole perfection thing. And I've always had this impression that if I don't do things perfect, I'm inadequate. And it's a big burden. And I've wondered I knew it came from my dad is an alcoholic, really difficult guy, but I didn't know what triggered it. And when you said, when was the first time you experienced it, the circumstance came to mind. I was a hockey player, I really an exceptional player in my youth. And when I was 9 years old, we had a game. I scored all 6 goals. I was the only player on the team who scored. My dad was at the game, one of the few rare games. When we left, I walked out with my dad, and I remember walking out. He was on my left side. He had his hat on, cocked a certain way. And he said to me, one issue. He told me about the goal that I missed and not the 6 that I made. And I realized that's where it started from. That's where, from that point on in my life, I could never do things good enough.
Thank you. And so that thinking through that frees him from the idea. That sense of perfectionism is not his fault. It's not his fault. It was given to him. It was said to him, and at his age at the time, he received it as 6 isn't enough. And the fact that you're the only one, it doesn't matter. So have any of you ever worked for a company where you have a stunning year and they go, that's really good, but we need more than that next year? We can't get out of the scarcity model. We can't get out of it. You're not good enough. And it's all on you. Like his dad doesn't say, let's together figure out how to score one more. It's like, it's all on you. Good luck. I'm just here to judge. Like, that's it. That's the world that we all feel trapped in, is that right there. I feel it. That's why this process is so important, to be just constantly in it, and then extending it to the people around you so that they can participate in it, because we're so interconnected that their woundedness and falsehood directly affects me, right? That's we're not separate. We're interconnected at every level. Again, this is the thing that's really blown this up is quantum physics, which is nothing exists except in relationship to something itself at the granular level of all reality. At the granular level of all reality, if 2 particles separate, they cease to exist. And they will only reappear when they come back into relationship to another particle. Nothing exists independent of other things. Nothing. So this whole belief that we've bought into, that we're individuals and that we have the right to be who we're supposed to be, is very dangerous because it makes the other person an object. They're no longer a person, they're an object for me to compete in the lonely, mechanistic, cold universe that's against me. And all of us are in it. Nice people are in it. Mean people are in it. We're all in it. Occasionally, you'll meet a person who will not participate in this lie. Occasionally. So Cheryl asked me, like, where did I learn this? I'm going to talk about this tonight. But from one person, it always depends on one person just being their true identity in a tough situation. And you get to see it because people can't do what they've never seen. People can't become something they've never seen. It's impossible for humans to create out of a vacuum. So when a kid is thinking about, okay, what's an example of a person who's altruistic, who's secure in themselves, who are not fighting the system to gain as much as they can, who just sit there and go, you know what, I have enough. Like, I'm okay, I have enough. I'm not trying to get any more, it's enough. If they haven't seen that, they can't create, they can't be it, they can't become it. So they have to have a model in their mind, or they have to have seen one that they can aspire to, right? And so what do our kids look to as the model of the future of who they want to be? It's terrifying, but it's not new. This is the story of civilization. We all want to be like the gods, but the gods are fallen, and they're capricious, and they're for some people and against other people, and it's the same God is in the same lie. The God is separate, or the gods are separate, and they don't show up unless I say this certain magic series of words, or unless I put out this incense in the correct direction, or unless I'm facing the right direction when I call out to the universe. The animistic view that gods are not for me, but I can manipulate them with power if I figure out how to do it, what they jump to. Every religion does this. And if you don't invoke the gods or the universe the way I do, you're wrong. And we're separate. And we're competing. And here we go again and again and again. Right? So there has to be a model for us that we can image forth, meditate on, whatever you want to call it, that like this is the direction I want to go. So it has to be somewhat specific, but it has to be something completely self-sacrificial in some way. Something that's I'm receiving from at every level all the time. Whatever that is, love, truth, that idea. I'm going to participate in love and truth no matter what happens around me, and I'm going to stand. We say I'm going to stand fearlessly in my true identity no matter what is said out here that's false. And we know people that have died for that belief. They'll go to prison for it, and they're great civil rights leaders and leaders. But they do lay down their life because the system works against it. Unless all of us did it, then the whole thing would change. But it begins with one. So I had one person look at me and say, in the middle of a job, and say, you don't know your identity, do you? I've never had anybody say that to me. You don't know your identity, do you? So as soon as you hear something, you can't unhear it, right? So as soon as you don't know your identity, was that a judgment? That's a good question. But I felt very much like that was a judgment because I'm an American and you don't tell me my identity, even though I don't know what it is. You don't ask me a question like that. And I said, yes, I do. And he goes, no, you don't. And I said, yes, I do. And he goes, what is it? He goes, and then I'm trapped. Then I'm like, I'm an American, whatever. And I said to him, how do you know I don't know my identity? And he said, because you're imitating me. That's what he said. Who are our kids imitating? Who are we imitating? Who are we trying to be like? And our models are probably based on what you have, what you do, and what people think about you. That's what it is, which is never enough, which is scarcity from the very beginning of the idea because you'll never get there. And so the guy said to me, I'm already here. We don't need me again. Like Oscar Wilde said, be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. Like, who are you trying to be? And he said to me, I'm already here. I work here. I've been here. I know what I contribute. We don't need another me. We need you and your real identity, but we don't know what it is unless you know what it is. So you need to find it and tell us what it is so we know what you do. I've never had anybody talk to me like that. Right? And so I said, how do you do that? And they sent me to a guy that's an expert on identity. That's how fast they did it. Someone whose identity is to help people discover their identity. That's what this other guy's function was in the organization. One day with him, life-changing. I cried half the day. I'm like, I'm not, I said to him, this is always a mistake. I'm not a very emotional person. My dad, and I mean, he said, yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, that's the self-protective. Oh, I'm not emotional. What does that mean? I refuse to engage my emotions because they terrify me. I will go out of control like that. And so he's like, whatever, we don't care. 5 sentences in, I'm bawling my eyes out because of a memory like what he just shared of my own dad. Never, just disappointed. Just always disappointed like that. Or my mom. Anyway, so that's kind of encapsulating from yesterday. So we have our own story and our own identity that we need to discover, and then we have to realize we're participating in a world story that dramatically really counters our true identity, actually. It counters it. It moves against it. And so one world story is a model of separation, scarcity, and the motivating factors are fear, power, and control. Pretty much everything we're involved in is that one. The alternative to that is what I was calling the ancient cultures or the indigenous cultures. I don't mean primitive. I mean just original, right? Not old, just the original view, which is everything is interconnected. They called it interbeing. It's funny how smart these folks were. We're all interconnected. Everything affects everything else. Right? So you are actually causal every day. That's the intention, that you're causal. You're not just affected by things and you're reacting to them. That's false. You actually have the capacity to be causal. Right? It's the word pioneer in Greek. That's what it means, to be the cause of things. But that's not what we're doing. We're just reacting to a system and trying to fit into it and work with all the brokenness instead of becoming a person that moves through truth-telling to another way of thinking, to another form of doing. That's the process that we're in every day. That's the process. Has to start here. It moves out here. So the other world story is interbeing, abundance. Like there's more than enough out here. Do you know that there's the money and resources to stop world hunger is available? Do you know that? Why can't we do it? Because we're competitive. And we don't want to give all our money to those people because they don't believe what we believe. So we'd rather let them starve until they agree with whatever it is we want them to agree with, then we'll give them food. Oh my gosh. How bestial is that? That is not human. That is creature-like to do that to people. Lots of issues that could be resolved pretty quickly, but we won't do it because we're afraid to share. Because who's going to protect me if I just give everything away? How many times do you hear that? Or if someone says this to me one more time, well, do you leave your door unlocked at night? That's why we need a wall. Like, what does that mean? Like, it's just trying to validate self-protection and self-promotion. We're trying to justify. But we all want to live in a world where we don't have locked doors and walls. Our heart wants that world. But our brain has been conditioned, that ain't never going to happen. And it's a dream world and it'll never happen. And you sound like a lunatic when you talk about it. That's the system we're in. So if we talk about world peace and all this, like, yeah, whatever. Let's be real. Let's be practical. These kinds of excuses for not being transformed. That's what happens to us. So the goal is I personally become an unconflicted human myself. This is the goal. I'm unconflicted. The conflict rages out here. I'm unconflicted. That means I'm above persecution. That means that I'm not afraid of losing my job, being punished. I'm not afraid of that because no one actually has the power to do all that stuff. So I'm above persecution. I'm beyond the fear of what people think because I don't get my identity from them. I get my identity from within, from within this that I'm in. That's, the flow. Yeah, we call it the flow, from the flow. And then I'm outside the worries of the world is like, I said to Donna the other day, I don't forget if I shared this, when going into this meeting on Tuesday morning, I said, what if they just terminate the contract that we're working on? What if they just terminate it and we have nothing else to do? I love saying this stuff to Donna because Donna's a planner, and this is in her true identity. Her skill at planning is just so beautiful. Like I said, I came home from my meeting with the CIA guy, and I, in the middle of the night, I wake her up and I go, she's 8 months pregnant, and I go, we're moving to the Middle East. Isn't that exciting? And she just bursts into tears. She has no idea what I'm talking about. And I think it's just hormonal. And it's not anything that I said, I'm sure. We're moving to the Middle East starting tomorrow. And she just starts crying like, pregnancy. So when she wakes up and knows what I said, she'll be happy. She wasn't. But when Donna is moving her true identity, so then we end up, we take the position, we move to Baghdad, and we're laying in Baghdad, and I look at her and I go, why the hell did you let us move here? That's how I think. I'm like, let's do it. And then we get there and I'm like, why are we here? And she's like, we're never leaving here. That's how she is. This is now going to be where we find joy and peace, and our kids are going to love this place, and this is going to be, that's how she talks. So in her true self, in my true self, I'm always looking like, you know what we could do? Do you know what we could do? And she says, yeah, and here's how we could do it. That's how we work together as a team, right? But in our false self, I avoid any kind of place where I feel like I'm stuck. I mean, I just will run from everything, and she will not move anywhere because she threat forecasts, which prevents her from moving at all. So our joke is, if we weren't a team, a partnership, she said I would be rich and on Prozac, married to a good rich Jewish doctor, and on Prozac and bored out of my mind, and I would be dead. I would have run off a cliff somewhere because I wasn't paying attention. I just wanted to see what was there. But together, if both of us are walking in our true identities, we're this very balanced, beautiful organism in motion forward. But well thought out. Like that's, not reckless. Right, yeah, exactly. And so that's so what keeps this together, what keeps us, because someone emailed me this morning, some college student, and asked me a question about what do you think about how to know who the right person is to marry and all that stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh. But here's what I said to that person. I said, I don't think there's like an exact right person, and if you don't get that person for some reason, you marry person B or C. I think it has to do with being in relationship with another person in their true identity, and you're in yours, and it'll always be beautiful whoever it is. Like it's the woundedness that separates and kills. It's not the true person. So anyway, so that's the idea. So as we're moving forward in these things, and the lack of conflict begins here, and you're just constantly like, why did that person make me feel threatened? Why did that situation make me fearful? Why am I upset about this? Because there's true emotion. Here's a true emotion. Anger is a emotion of truth. It's a reaction against injustice. True anger is a beautiful reaction. We should always be angry about injustice, always, right? That's a beautiful emotion. Sadness is an amazing emotion. We never want to get rid of sadness. Sadness is beautiful. But bitterness is a destructive emotion, right? Judgment, horrible emotion. So when we have negative emotion, I'm angry. You just want to make sure, okay, two things about anger. One is that it's at the injustice, not the person, the injustice. And two, that it goes away and doesn't become your identity. Because anger politics that started against injustice and now are just anger, nobody can get on board with them. They're just destructive. I mean, it could have started very beautiful as an injustice, but then it just turns into hate, and no one can get on board. Yeah, remember that. Sadness is a process of missing and acknowledging the absence of a relationship that was very beautiful at some level, but then also realizing that it actually never ends. So there's no reason to stay sad forever. Like the sadness is, okay, that person's not right there anymore or whatever. However, where are they? Is it gone? Well, again, I don't care what your religion is. If you listen to the lecture on quantum consciousness at the Institute of Consciousness Studies in Moscow that's delivered by an American and a British physicist, all you have to do is listen to them talk mathematically and scientifically about consciousness and what it is. And finally, some person said, well, what do you think about death? And they said, there is no such thing. That's what they said at a science conference on consciousness. Because consciousness, they said, doesn't begin and it doesn't end, which is what the ancients have been saying all along. But in a cold, separated, dead universe, death is the main thing we think about, is being dead, and we're terrified of it, right? But it's actually not true on really any level. So sadness, if it believes that the separation is permanent and damaging, will turn into bitterness and anger and disappointment. And I'm all alone, and I'm separate, and I'm going to die. See how those beautiful things can just go straight down the drain. So we need community. We need to be in community, encouraging one another. My identity, encouraging her identity. And we're moving forward, and we're facing all the lies that are out here that are killing us. And we're just going to take them on together. And there's 2 of us, and then 5 of us, and then this company, and then this politician, and then the different sectors. And then you call 911 and the police. I said just one last thing, and I'm going to let Donna get up here. But I was talking to these police officers in Phoenix, and I said it to Seattle. A traffic stop is the beginning of transformation for the person that you stop. You should hear these cops. You should see what they say to me. They're like, oh, brother, who is this guy? Who is this guy? They always say, are you a Quaker? What are you? Like... But here's the thing. I said, okay, there's just 2 viewpoints. Either we're law enforcers. What does a law enforcer do? They just punish people, right? They're judging people nonstop through the day. And I'm here to tell you, you were wrong, and here's the penalty. A lot of religion like this, right? Or it's really what says on most badges, servers and protectors. What are they doing? What are they doing out there? They're serving and protecting. It's very different than law enforcers. Law enforcers are legalists, rule builders, prosecutors. Servers and protectors are other-focused, self-sacrificial, unconditional lovers. What if your police department was full of that? Now, would they put people in jail? Absolutely, because they're protecting. They're not punishing, they're protecting. And they're serving. So I just said, imagine you make a traffic stop. I know because we've done this many times, and we've done this with officers who are disciplinary problems. It's dramatic what happens to them. You stop a car that's speeding. We saw the guys up on the highway today, and you say this to the driver, are you okay? Are you okay? Typically, what do they say when they walk up to you and you've been speeding? It's an accusation. It's like you're in church all of a sudden. It's like, do you know how fast you were going? Like, and you're already like guilty. You don't want to say it, but you're like, oh my gosh. And here comes the penalty. Like that. Should I tell the truth or make up some excuse? It's just like we're talking to God or something. But anyway, so you come up to the car and you say, are you okay? Because the speed limit is whatever it is, 35, and you're going 90. Okay, so I'm assuming that something is stressing. You got to get to something. You're in trouble. What's wrong? Like you start talking like this. What's wrong? Are you okay? Because you're going to hurt yourself or somebody else doing this. So do you want to tell me, like, what's wrong? Are you okay? Are you what's the feeling that you feel right now? Can you imagine a police officer and they'll be like, what? You're causing transformation in the public right then. Every traffic stop is a chance to transform yourself and other people. Like, it's an interaction with a human being between you and that human being. And guess how different you are from them? You're not different at all. That badge, that gun, their skin color, what they're driving makes no separation between you two. This person's mad at their spouse and they're driving like a maniac, and you're mad at your spouse, so you're going to write tickets all day and make people pay for it. Like, you're both doing the same thing, right? And so if you say like why, and and if the person, we'll get into this at the final thing, that if the person returns truth to your question, you pursue the truth. If they say, well, you know what, I just lost my job. You know what they're doing? They're truth telling to you. When a person truth tells to you, you receive it. You don't judge it. You receive it. Oh yeah. Wow. And yeah, I lost my job. Well, what happened? And then as the officer to serve and protect, you know what? I arrested a guy the other day. This is the CEO of a company. I have his phone number. I think they're hiring. Remember him saying something about the needing right people. And you start connecting people. And then here's what the officers always say to me. You'd never write a ticket. Oh, yes, you would. Oh, yes, you would. When do you write the ticket? That's right, when they won't tell the truth. Right? There's a penalty for not living in truth or telling the truth. And you're going to protect them just like she did with her daughter. I'm fine. Okay, no. All right, I'm asking you to tell me. You're not going to tell me. I'm going to make a suggestion to you. So I'm going to help you. You're not going to tell anyone the truth. You're going to shut everybody out because you're separate and no one cares about you and you're a victim. So here, I'm going to give you a little piece of paper to help you remember the question I asked you originally. What's wrong? And you said nothing. Get out of my face. Here it is. Sign it. You can come to court and fight this, or you can pay it. But don't forget why this is being given to you, because it's kindness that leads us to new ways of thinking. That's what happens. And so these guys in Phoenix, they started doing that. The captain was very suspicious of this, but guess what happened? Guess what happened when the officers started doing this? What do you think the public did? They started telling the truth. They started looking forward to being stopped. It was really interesting. They're like, were you stopped? Yeah, it was the best experience of my life. I mean, who is this woman or this person? Like, it was amazing. I felt loved. And then they started writing letters or sending communications to the chief, who suddenly was the best chief in the world. And when they asked the chief, what are you doing? He goes, well, we're trying to be progressive. I don't know what they're doing out there, but it's all good. So that's how fast you can change a system. It took 3 officers to start doing that. One officer stopped he had been disciplined 3 times for not use of force, but being rude to the public. I'll tell that tonight. Never mind, I'll tell you. We actually sent him to the Middle East. That's one way we help people that have a problem with other races. We send them into that country and leave them. And say, talk to them there like you talk to them here and see what happens. And anyway, that's interesting. What happens? Okay, so anyway, any questions about all that? Good, because Donna is now going to take us deep into identity and through the personal identity process. And then at the end, after lunch, we're going to talk about, okay, how do I become a part of changing the form of things around me, right? Truth tell, mind change, form change in my life, and then truth tell, mind change, form change in my organization or corporation. All right. Thank you. Donna's writing down notes because what I said was so profound. No, I don't know.
My favorite speaker, right there. Someone asked me, and Jamie disappeared because this is more your expertise, about affective filters, what that means a little bit, because this is what blocks the educational process, especially when we're talking about school children. And it's anything that's in your mind that's fear-based. And so you come and imagine a child who lives in a dysfunctional family, which is a high percentage of children, and they come to school, they didn't have breakfast, they are wearing the same clothes that they wore yesterday, they didn't bathe, there were negative interactions with the family in the morning, and they come in and they're stressed out and they were yelled at and shoved around, and then they're sitting there and you're saying, okay, Johnny, stand up and you tell the whole class the 4 multiplication tables. 1 times 4 is, and their affective filter is so high and they're viewing everything through this shame and fear that's stemming from what they're experiencing in the home, the place that's supposed to be safe. and they can't learn because it's blocking it. Jamie did a big thing about this, and you can ask him more questions on it in a university setting overseas, and had people tell the truth about what those affective filters were. And there was one stunning transformation that took place among a young woman who was married, who was having a lot of marriage difficulties, and realized that she was in this graduate English program and she was failing because she was coming in with this filter of guilt and shame and false identity stemming from this dysfunctional marriage and this abusive marriage situation. And so working to get those affective filters down through truth telling and reconceptualizing and coming into your true identity, because no one can define who you are. I don't care how bad your situation is, that person or that thing that's abusive to you does not give you identity. And that you have a choice in every situation about what you believe. That's what makes you human. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about. And I loved the language that Cheryl, you used with your daughter about reframing, because that's what it is. It's reconceptualizing. It's reinterpreting a negative situation. There's a negative and a positive. There isn't just a negative. There's always a positive, even in what seems to be the worst situations. I have a lot of stories about that. Yeah, wow. I'm just going to tell this. I'm just going to go with the flow of truth here. I was working on identity with a young woman who had been sex trafficked and here in the United States. She got a job from a small town in Texas, moved to the Northeast, got a job in a big city. She had never lived in a big city. She had never lived outside of her family home. And she was just very trusting. And one of the company's clients that she worked for, she had to have some meetings, and then suddenly he wanted to have the meetings in the evening and then over dinner, and then one thing led to another, and she's in consensually in his apartment, and he steals her wallet and he doesn't let her leave, and she's a kidnap victim. And it was just terrible, the things he did. And what he was doing was he was reprogramming her to make these hideous sex acts that she was engaging in with him, because he was preparing to sell her to these harems in the Middle East, for lack of a better word. And so he was reprogramming her so that would become normal. And it was terrible. And it's a big, long story. And she was able to escape after about 9 months, and had all kinds of physical, psychological trauma that she was dealing with. And I started working with her a little bit. I am not a professional therapist, and so I don't want you to confuse. Sometimes there are people in your lives, including yourself, and you need professional help. And so she was seeing a professional therapist, and psychiatrist and doctors. She was on all kinds of medications and everything to help her. But in the moment of her identity transformation, so much of her identity came from that situation, because she was such a young woman and she was ignorant, innocent, if you will, of any kind of sexual life. And so this is what framed sex for her, which is really sad. And in the middle, I'd been with her, meeting with her for a few months, and I guess about the second or third month, she went to this memory, and in the memory, it was really traumatic. So I don't even want to say what it was, but it was very traumatic in a sex act, and she dissociated. And she could see herself as a little child over in the corner of the room in a little ball crying. And she felt like she had just given up and succumbed to whatever this guy was doing to her. And she felt horrible guilt and shame over that. And she took on this identity of worthless piece of crap. And that she's just shamed that I just gave up. I didn't fight. I just gave up. And then in that moment, where she was in that moment, she's disassociated over in the corner, And I just said the question, what does truth want you to know? What is the truth of what was happening there? What does the flow of love in the universe want you to know? And suddenly I just watched the light bulb. You know, that moment, I just love it. I just saw the light bulb go off. And she looked at me and she said, I saved my life. And she didn't realize it, but the reconceptualization, the reframing, how could there be anything good in that situation? By dissociating, she saved her life because he was strangling her. She saved her life. And when she had that aha moment that dissociation saved her life, negative influences in her mind were saying, you gave up. But the truth was she saved her own life by dissociating, and it changed everything. Her healing was so expedited after that point. And so, yeah, this is what we're talking about. So what I want to do, how I want to start this morning with my part of what we're doing is I want to get really practical. Yes, LV. Wait, you need a microphone. It's Joey's job. You're in the back.
All right. We good? Okay. I'm going to qualify this. I know I shouldn't, but I'm going to. First, I absolutely love these stories, and the energy and inspiration and hope is off the charts. I was sitting with this yesterday, and Donna, you just said this, and I loved it, but I want to ask more around this. You said, I'm not a therapist, and I think for me, there's a question that's lingering, and I hesitate to ask it. I'm just going to trust this space and this group to ask it. There's a feeling that a lot of what is happening is leaning into some really delicate work around psychology and psychiatry. And the genuineness and the heartbeat behind it is rich and deep and pure. How do you reconcile the trained art of psychiatry and psychology and the credentials that the world would say is necessary to be competent in that, with maybe moments when you say, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, the voice inside my head goes, yeah, Donna and Jamie have been doing this for 30 years and seen unbelievable impact around the globe. So who cares about that? And yet the question of credentials or competence, in quotes, comes up. And I guess I'm just wondering what you say to that, how you navigate that, how you reconcile that with people. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
It makes sense. You have everything you need inside yourself to heal yourself. And your healing is not just physical healing. It's emotional, spiritual, mental, physical. You cannot separate these things. On the simplest level, if you're stressed out, you're going to have a heart attack. You cannot separate your body. So when I'm saying healing, I mean the whole package. And I firmly believe you have everything inside yourself to heal yourself. But it's not really but, it's an and. Sometimes we just need help figuring that out. Sometimes you need someone to process with because we are in relationship, right? We're all connected. It's not about the requirements of who you should be. It's about the relationship you have with people because you are connected. You are in relationship. And so I think the more you understand yourself and how you work, Jamie and I have just read volumes and volumes about this. And I'm living in a tiny little island of 2 million people in Indonesia, and I am having a crisis because I feel like an utter failure. I feel totally inadequate, ill-prepared. I came to make a difference. I'm not making a difference. I'm laying in bed crying. I have women spitting on me in the village where I'm working because I'm the enemy, the American enemy coming to change their culture. I wasn't changing their culture. I was helping them learn to read. and I didn't have anybody to go to. And so that started us on this journey of discovering, why do I think this way? Because you know what? This is my mantra. You cannot give away what you do not have, which means you're only giving away what you do have. You are transmitting all the time. And what is not being transformed, you are transmitting. On the same view, what is being transformed is also being transmitted. And I was desperate. And so I think what we learn, there's common principles, and sometimes we need to go to a professional to get help. I mean, that's all there is, but it's still up to you. Jamie referenced AA yesterday. It's still up to you to realize that you are powerless and that there are forces in the atmosphere, in the universe. Like we said yesterday, the earth is healing itself. There are forces. You are created. Your body is designed to heal itself. And sometimes we just need help accessing that. But if we look to the psychiatrist or the psychologist or the therapist to heal us, then we're in trouble, because your healing is inside of you. They can help you sort it out. You can have them as a person that you're confessing your truth to, and they can help you reframe it. But that's still deep. You have everything you need to be healed already inside of you. But we were made for a relationship, and so sometimes we're connected. And I think as a lay person doing this, recognizing when something requires more expertise. Some people, for instance, are just so mired down in their depression, their anger, that it's caused a terrible chemical imbalance, and they need medical help, which is a form of healing, to get balance, so then they can receive truth, they can reframe, they can reconceptualize. Does that make sense? And it's just recognizing that. But here's what I know, that I was dramatically transformed from learning to tune into that flow of love in the universe. And this is actually where I wanted to start this morning, with just a little bit of my story on that. Does that help answer your question?
I guess the only one small question there would be, how did you learn when you were moving into the space where you should refer back to the professional? I'm asking from a place of early, adoption of this. I don't want to overstep my boundaries. Is there anything you might say to give me insight on how I can recognize I might be going out of my scope and need to refer them away? Does that make sense?
So I'm going to use this trafficking victim as an example. I wouldn't have touched her with a 10-foot pole if she wasn't seeing medical professionals, because she was so severe. But they weren't providing, they were trying to talk her out of an identity that she took on using all kinds of different, strategies. And she was getting a little better, but I truly believed that she could come into a place of freedom, not just maintenance. And she was in that stage of maintenance, but there was also a probability of potential suicide. And that's, you give that person, you call 911, right? You don't, that's, you call 911. And so I wanted, it's a team. We need a team. We need the physical doctor. We need the mental doctor. We need the spiritual doctor. I would say I was the spiritual doctor in her case.
So again, this is an interesting question, because it's part of the world story that we're in, that certain people have papers that say they're more qualified than you. And it's not true, actually. And I mean, so we one class Donna was teaching, she came to me and said, "Do you know who's in my class?" And it was the most well-known psychiatrist in the city we lived in, and we were in a big city. And so he's a medical doctor, psychiatrist, Harvard that kind of thing. And he's in Donna's class. He came to take the class. He paid to take the class. The question is interesting. Why? Shouldn't Donna be in his class? Like, according to this viewpoint that there's certain credentials that people have, but the credential doesn't make a person well, right? The school can't make a person well. And so anyway, he was in the class. He's a fantastic guy. He's the one that started recommending, the police department would send problems to him. He would send them to us. The difference between him and us was he could prescribe medication. That was one big difference, right? So if he would listen to a person, once he took Donna's class, he actually told us, I'm going to change the way I do things because I didn't know this. They didn't teach this when I went to school. So, but then he called me and he said, can I meet with you alone? So I go meet with him at this restaurant, and he this is what he says to me. He goes, I'm famous. And I said, I know. And he said, I have famous people that come for treatment from me. There's a great guy in Seattle that's like this. And he said, and I'm rich and I have all the qualifications, but I'm missing one thing in my life. Do you know what he was missing? Joy. He didn't know how, the books didn't teach him how to have joy. Right? So where's he going to go? He's the expert, but he doesn't know how to have joy. And he told me, he goes, I have a great marriage. I don't have any sense of joy in anything that I do. Because, you know why? Because the money, everything's not enough. He's stuck in the world story. And so I said to him, okay, is it okay if we do a little experiment together? And when I would start to do something with me, he would tell me which psychological theory I was using. And I said, can you do me a favor and shut up while we do this? Because what he's saying is all these theories aren't enough. That's what he's saying. So who's going to help him find the enough? Right? If Freud couldn't do it, or Jungian or whatever, all that. And so anyway, we did this process together until the restaurant closed. And then we moved outside because he got so involved in it personally that in the process of what we're doing, he discovered joy from me, And so then he said, okay, from now on, I'm changing the form of how I do what I do in my practice. And it didn't hurt his practice. It added a whole other element to his practice. So what happens in the system is, we talked a little about this earlier. So if you have a person that's a naturopath coming, they'll never be invited to speak at the credentialed because they don't have the right credentials. But who's saying who the expert is? Right? There's a system that says this person's an expert. And so we don't want those weird herbal people in here because they're lunatics, and except sometimes it does work. So isn't the answer like, let's be interrelated again, and not like send them to the expert. And then just one other thing I'll say, we were in Detroit doing a thing, and this guy calls me and says, can you come meet with me for lunch? I got to meet with, he's the head of a massive counseling practice. He's the lead guy. Same thing. And he's telling me, this is what we're doing, blah, 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 blah. And I said, yeah. I said, great, that's beautiful. That's amazing. And, where he went to school and all that. And then he said, here's my problem. And he starts to cry. He said, I feel so inadequate. I feel like such a liar because I'm unhappy myself. So it's about humanity. It's not about credentials, really, is the bottom line. But yeah. And about lawsuits, right? About lawsuits. That's really what you're asking, isn't it? Yeah. Self-protection. Right.
What you're saying actually is, because we call it the AIP model, the brain wants to process trauma. It's the automatic information processing, and it's the body. It's just like it want to heal a wound. It wants to heal this emotional wound. And as I've been in this, I've been doing this 10 years. Also, all I've worked with is combat trauma and MST, military sexual trauma. And there is 100 different modalities you could use. But ultimately, it is the brain wants to work on it. And this is, I find, a very effective getting to ground truth that will really help people do it. Now, the biggest issue where they say determine, do I press forward or not? And what they teach us and everything is, it's all about safety. That's the biggest factor. It's all about safety. When you look at this person, if I uncork this trauma, is it going to destabilize? Are they going to decompensate? Do they have a support structure around them that can help support that? But people can work on trauma in so many different venues that I think this is absolutely applicable venue. and it's just is the safety factor there. That's the biggest judge. If we pulled this plug and allowed this open, do they have the support around them that will, make sure they're still safe and they don't decompensate into a destructive mode?
Yeah. So one other last thing related to all of this is I'm going to use the word authority. And here's a very simple illustration. I can read a book about how to ride a bike. And I can learn the physics of balance. I can learn how the bike works with the chain, why the wheels need spokes, how the handlebars, how the faster you go, the more balanced you are. I can read all about it. And then I can look at you and I can tell you everything that I've learned. But do either of us know how to ride a bike? No, we don't have the experience. And once you have the experience, you can't give away what you don't have. Once you have the experience, you're an expert on it. We were teaching on this in a church setting with a small group. And this homeless man walked in off the street. I didn't know him from Adam. We didn't know him. He just saw a church and walked in for help. And that whole thing of that sense of flow of love and relationship, I felt it so strongly towards that man that I went up and started talking to him. He was a Vietnam War vet, and I saw he had hearing aids in both ears. And so I just told him that I just felt strongly that there was going to be a miraculous healing that was going to take place. And so a few of us came up to him and started talking to him about identity and having him listen and having him walk through forgiveness of things that had happened in his life, which we're going to talk about today and walk through. In case you're wondering the part that plays, it's a huge part. And then we said, take your hearing aids out and talk about affective filters that were blocking him from everything inside his body that was trying to heal him. He started to be able to hear, and it was incredible. And once he started, the dam broke. He wanted it, and he wanted more. And he came out of this victim mentality and into this, everything is for me. And in relationship with other people, everything in my body that wants to heal itself can be unblocked and come out. And he walked out of that room being able to hear. But do you remember what I said about authority? We said it was a very small group of people. Is anybody else in here having trouble with their ears, with hearing? Because there seems to be some energy in the room where hearing is coming alive. Deafness that's been there, or a shutting down of being able to hear has been there, but there's this aliveness and energy of hearing in the room. And 4 people raised their hand. And we looked at this man, his name was James. He had probably never spoken out loud in front of other people ever in his life. And we just said, James, do to them what was just done to you, because now you have the authority. You have the authority to do it. And he did, and 3 of the 4 people, their issue was resolved in that moment. And this is that relationship and that interconnectedness. And to answer back to LV's question, I have a certain authority because I've experienced it. And I'm not afraid to put my hand on someone else and say, what is the truth about this? Okay, think about the negative, reframe it. What is love? What is truth trying to communicate to you? Okay, does that make sense? Good. So a little bit about my story. I'm going to tell you a little of my story, then we're going to take a quick break and come back and do some what I call listening exercises or thought experiments related to all this. So how did I get into this? I'm just curious how many people here were raised in some kind of religious background. maybe I should say, was anybody raised in just not any kind of religious background at all? Because everybody's raising their hand. Yeah, I'm from a Jewish family, and my grandparents all immigrated to the United States during in the 1920s when things were kind of building up to what happened in Russia. The Fiddler on the Roof kind of movie scenario. They're from, all four of my grandparents are from Russia. And then leading up to the Holocaust. And a lot of my family from there died actually in the Holocaust and in the Russian Revolution. And yeah, it's kind of a tragic but heroic story of the brave ones that were able to escape and get out. And then my family is thriving now in America. I grew up in a very tight-knit Jewish community. And it's interesting because my husband grew up in a very conservative Christian background, and then we moved to the Muslim world, and we lived also our first year overseas we actually lived in a Hindu context. Then we lived in deep in militant Islamic cultures. And I think what we really figured out is that your religious team is not your identity, and that your religious or lack of a religious upbringing is not really the most important thing. Sometimes we make it the most important thing, but the most important thing is to recognize that we are spiritual beings. Human beings are spiritual. And in my case, when I was a young child, when it was in a very tight-knit Jewish community, very, very Jewish, Hebrew school, bat mitzvah, the whole thing. But deep down inside, I realized that it was about the traditions of Judaism, and a lot of the motivation for what my family and community did in a religious context was out of guilt. Because, you know, your great-grandmother died over there at the hands of the Nazis, and you better be true to Judaism because she died and you're free. And the guilt that came along with freedom was a heavy burden to bear, especially when you start realizing it when you're 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And for me, any sense of God was very negative. He's mad at the Jews all the time, and you better do what he says to do, or you're going to get exiled, or you're going to be in the Spanish Inquisition, or you're going to be in the Holocaust, and everybody hates you. And it wasn't a joy-filled community for me. I always felt judged. I never felt like I was doing enough. There's that scarcity system of the world. I never felt like I was doing enough, that I wasn't a good Jew, and that was my identity, and I didn't like it. I had experienced a lot of anti-Semitism. Not a lot. I had experienced some anti-Semitism in elementary school and middle school, and I didn't want anybody to, I was embarrassed. It was shameful to me. I felt different. I didn't feel like this part of the status quo. But here's the biggest thing. I was terrified of death, and I was terrified of death because I didn't know what happened to you when you die, and my religious upbringing did not answer that question. Dad, what happens? Where do you go when you die? Our dog died when I was about 5 or 6. And this realization of, wait, I'm going to die one day. Wait, I'm not going to live forever. You know, every child, we all come into that understanding. Dad, what happens to you when you die? Oh, I don't know. Don't think about that. Let's watch TV. Go to my Hebrew school class. Mrs. Brumfield, what happens to you when you die? Oh, honey, your soul lives on in the memory of others. Well, when I'm lying in my bed at night and it's dark and I'm alone, I don't care that my soul's living on in the memory of others, because this is what it's going to be like when I'm dead. I'm going to be alone and in the dark. And then I went to my rabbi when I got a little older. What happens to you when you die? You go to the bosom of Abraham. That's what I was told. What does that even mean? You go to the bosom of Abraham. No explanation. And I just got mired down deep inside, full of guilt and shame, and I'm different. How come my brothers aren't asking these questions? My mom would put me to bed at night, and she would say the Hebrew prayers over me. And, Mom, what happens to you when you die? don't think about that. Oh, that's a terrible thing to think about. Let's think about your birthday. It's coming up in a couple of weeks. What kind of presents do you want? Think about that where you're falling asleep. That's a terrible thing to think about, but it's the fate of every human being. This is a terrible thing. But here was the thing. I knew there was something deep inside of me that was spiritual, that wasn't physical. I just knew it. I don't know how I knew it, but I just knew it. And that's what happens to that part of you. And I just took on this deep identity of fear and shame and guilt. I had other influences in my life, a sibling, a couple of different teachers. I became a teacher because I wanted every student to know that they were the teacher's pet, because I felt so ignored once I got to middle school, not as much in elementary school, but once I got to middle school, I felt so ignored, unseen, don't fit in, don't belong. And that just formed my identity. One of my older brothers used to tell me when I was young, "You're stupid, you can't play with us," just sibling rivalry. But my parents, if they tried to change that, I don't recall, because remember, listen to me, the truth is not always your perception, and your perception is not always the truth. And my perception of those years is that my brother never got in trouble for hitting me, not in an abusive way, but hitting me, telling me I'm stupid, you can't play with us, nobody wants to be with you. Walking to school, he was supposed to walk me to school. I was in second grade, first grade. As soon as we got around the curve of our street and my mom couldn't see us as she's smiling and waving from the door, he would run ahead of me, and I didn't know the way. And I don't ever remember him getting in trouble. "Oh, Donna, don't be so sensitive." And so I took on these perceptions that weren't true, but you know what? They felt true. They felt really true. And as I got older, I became very rebellious, and all of that was coping mechanisms to deal with the deep pain I felt. I was searching for belonging, and I was searching for acceptance. And you can see this in high school kids today. This doesn't change. This is the age-old story that we were created to be in relationship. And I found acceptance with, back in the day, we called them the freaks. You know, there were the smart people, the jocks, and the freaks. And if somebody handed you weed and said, "Hey, smoke this with me," you were readily accepted. You know, it's not so easy to get on the cheerleading squad. It's not so easy I tried to be on the track team. It's not so easy to belong in those clubs. I went to a really big high school and kind of got lost in the sauce there and became anonymous. And so I was going through a big crisis, and my coping mechanism was to self-medicate, because if I could get high before I went to sleep, I didn't have to think about being dead, because that consumed me. And as I got older, this was still with me, and I went to college, and it was still with me, and I didn't do well in school. And then I met all these different kinds of people, and I became friends. This is actually how I met Jamie, with some girls who were all about this transformation, a spiritual transformation of coming into your true self. And I started hanging around with them, and I realized you could have fun on a Friday night watching a movie and eating popcorn. You did not have to go to the fraternity party to have fun. When I went to the fraternity party, I would wake up in the morning miserable, sometimes not in my room, my own room. But if I hung out with these gals, I had fun and was accepted. And I, again, think this was that flow and energy of love calling me and drawing me in. Because listen, you have a choice in every situation. My parents, God bless them, they were children of immigrants who didn't speak English. They grew up during the Depression. I'm not blaming them. It was the Leave It to Beaver generation, you know, the post-World War II generation. If we provide a good home and you have clothes and food, We are good parents. My dad, I love him dearly. He was emotionally detached. And I didn't realize I had a choice about all these things, that I could have looked at that girl in the bathroom handing me the joint and I could have said, no, that will hurt me. I didn't know I could say no. That sickness of wanting to belong, to be in relationship was pure and right and good. And there's just negative stuff that tries to rob you of that and give you a different identity. So I started hanging around with these girls in college, and that's when I started to realize that I have this choice. I don't have to do these other things. And I can belong, get a sense of belonging from people who care about me for my sake. This is when I met Jamie. He cared about me. He didn't care what I did for him at all. Where every other person that I was good friends with before this time cared about what I could give to them or add to them or somehow be for them. But these people cared for me, period. And it was life-changing. And I remember going out by myself. I was in the car. Sometimes I have my best moments in the car because when you're driving, or in the shower is another one. When you're driving, all the parts of your brain that shut down where the affective filters live are busy driving the car. And so your mind is open to receive these eureka moments, the light bulb aha moments of thought when you're asking the right questions. And I was driving in the car and I just realized that I wanted this love like these people had. And I just screamed into the universe, who am I? I mean, I just screamed it out in the car. I want this love. Who am I? And I had this flood. It wasn't a voice, but it was a flood of peace. This is the indicator that it's true. Peace is always true. The opposite of fear is freedom. I was so mired down in fear, and I suddenly sensed that I could have this love that these girls were showing me, that I matter, and that my worth doesn't come from my brother who told me I was stupid. No person can define who you are. And I was able to kind of let that go, just let it go. And it was that eureka moment, that realization moment. And I love this question, what do I need to know about this? When you have a negative feeling, asking that question, tapping in to that energy of love, what do I need to know about this? And I just got this sense, I created you different. You are created different, and you have a hunger for deep spiritual truth that at this point in life, your brother doesn't have, your mother and father don't have. I separated you for this reason. And that's just the sense. It was a sense. It wasn't a voice. And I was flooded with a realization of peace and beauty. And remember, the freedom is the opposite of fear, that deep fear of death. This realization that, like Jamie was saying, there's a consciousness that makes up who I am, and that will continue. Your body doesn't continue, but energy is in motion and you can't stop it. And this is an energy that just changes form. And it gave me so much peace and confidence and a sense that I'm not alone. And so this was the beginning of my kind of transformational journey. Just, who am I? What do I need to know? I'm so tired of feeling guilty and feeling ashamed and feeling like something's wrong with me and I don't fit in. And when I was able to receive that sense of peace, that sense of worthiness, that I was born for a purpose and for a reason, and my identity is this natural spiritual bent, when I was able to receive that for myself, back to LV's question, I became an authority in it. I was not afraid to go up to people, other people, and say, what do you need to know? What is the truth about who you are? But it's interesting because people have to want it. Not everybody wants it. I couldn't go to my brother and say, hey, look, I had this big experience. Let's do it together. That's stupid, because that's his mechanisms of defense. That's his coping mechanism to prove to everyone that he's good and smart and domineering and dominating and whatever. But I can have compassion on that because we grew up in the same family, and I can have compassion on him. And it just changed everything for me and started what I call a listening lifestyle. So here's what I want to do now. I want to take a little bit of a break, and I want you to be able to go to the bathroom, grab a coffee, but everybody look outside. It is so gorgeous out there. And you know, at night, this kind of desert climate here, I forget, we live in Seattle, it's real humid and you don't feel this. You know, when it gets dark, it's instantly freezing cold. But when it gets light, this morning when we left the house, it was only 38 degrees, but it felt so warm out. So what I want us to do, I'm going to give you a listening assignment, because the thing that set this in my heart was I practiced it. It's not a one and done. I started practicing it, and I surrounded myself with other people that had a daily spiritual practice. And you know what that does? It changes the formation of your brain. When we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So what I want you to do is take a break, get whatever beverage you like, and you can come back in here, or I want you to go outside. Actually, we'll take about 15 or 20 minutes. Take your notebook, because when you experience these aha moments, these eureka moments, it's in the same part of your brain where you dream. And if you don't write it down and make it concrete, you forget. You know how you have a dream and it goes away? And also to record your journey, because this is a step in the journey, and you can't take the next step if you don't remember the step before, right? So it's important to write it down. That's why we wanted to provide journals for everybody, or something to write on. So I'm going to ask that you don't talk. I know that's really hard because we're all very relational and we all belong and we're social, but I'm going to ask you not to talk and just spread out on the property and come back at 11 o'clock. It's about a little bit before 11:45, right? And come back at 11 o'clock, 5 after 11, let's say. And here's the question that I want you to think about. And a lot of us think better when we are walking around rather than just sitting. So figure out what you know your style of learning. And I want you to ask this question. Where in my upbringing, in my life, was love reaching out to me and calling my name, encouraging me, giving me identity that maybe I missed? I might have missed it. Think back into your life, especially in your childhood, especially and anything that comes to your mind is what you're supposed to think about. I don't want to tell you what to think about. But just ask that question. Where was love coming to me and encouraging me, and somehow I missed it? Those affective filters were up. Because you know what? Love is outside of time. Truth is outside of time. And we can remember and be reframed by the truth, the interpretation of the truth rather than the false. Okay, so where in my life was truth and love speaking to me and I missed it? And then that great question, what am I supposed to know about that? What am I supposed to know? And just listen. And usually that truth and that flow of love is the very first thing you sense. Because then your mind comes in and it's like, oh no, that's just because you watched that movie last night, or oh, that's just me. No, that very first thing is usually capture it and write it down. Okay, so we're going to have silence and spread out and be back around 11.